Hello, everyone. I'm Raj Changdu, and welcome to my sit down today with Ahmed Khan. Ahmed specializes in serviced accommodation and, in the space of a few short years, has managed to do over 40 deals in multiple locations, including London, and he's run his business remotely from his smartphone. I've been very much looking forward to having this sit down with Ahmed and discussing the insights into this particular strategy today. But without further ado, let's welcome Ahmed to the show. Ahmed, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
No problem at all. No, I've been looking forward to talking about this strategy in particular. But before we go any further, let's start from the beginning. Like with most guests, can you tell us a little bit of an insight into how you got into property, a bit about your journey?
Okay, so I finished university not too long ago. September 2016, I graduated. I did 3 years of economics in London, and the plan was very, very straightforward. It was, go to university 3 years, do an economics degree, and get some sort of job in either banking, consultancy, or something along those lines. So I think in 3 years, the way a lot of universities work is you have 3 years or 4 years, and you sort of apply for different roles during those 3 years. So you might have in the first year you might have a 1 week internship you apply for. In the second year you have a 6 week internship that you apply for, and then in the last year you apply for basically the main job. I applied for about 30 of these internships in the course of the 3 years. I didn't get a single one. I had about 16, 17 interviews. I didn't get a single one. So this is banking, consultancy, accountancy. By the end of it, I was applying to anything and everything. So initially it was, I wanted to do banking consultancy. In the end, I was applying for just pretty much any sort of graduate role, I suppose. Um, I just felt I was never very good with interviews. So great that we're on a podcast now, right? I was never very I wasn't very good with what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, all those type of questions. So I never made it very far. But so then I started thinking, well, if I'm not gonna get a job, might as well try to do something myself. Always wanted to do something, I suppose, entrepreneurial, and this sort of pushed me into one. So I started looking into property after finishing university. One of the things I very quickly realized was that I think a lot of people who get into property, they think buy to let is the main thing, because that is obviously the one which the masses are aware of. But so that was my plan. I was gonna finish university, starting buy to lets. The problem was I didn't have a lot of money, and didn't really think about how much money it took. Just kind of said I'll do buy to lets. So then I started looking into property, and realized very quickly there's faster ways of making cash flow than doing buy to lets. And I always say I don't think there's a good strategy or a bad strategy. It just depends on your particular situation, your particular context at the time. So with me, there was no point doing anything which had assets and equity and so on and so on. The only thing I wanted was some sort of cash flow because I didn't have a job. So if you're trying to do something which is to replace your income or something along those lines, that should be your main goal. How can I make cash flow pretty fast? So I started doing service accommodation, rent to rent service accommodation in London, in Hertfordshire, in those sort of areas, because the only thing I needed at the time was cash flow. So I did about 40 of those deals, like you mentioned before. Some were rent to rent, some were management, some I sort of just packaged and sold to other people. And I did that for 3 years, 3.5 years, and I still do it now. But over the last 16 months or so, I started buying properties as well, and doing essentially like a buy to let model, but doing the buying, adding a lot of value, and then renting out to sort of recycle how much money I could get back essentially. So I've done essentially two things. One is the rent to rent service accommodation because I needed cash flow. And once I felt I had enough cash flow, I started transitioning into buying. And then obviously I've done a lot of speaking and podcasts and those sort of things, which I did for a long, long time as well. So, but yeah, it's all been within property for the last 3.5, 4 years almost now. But yeah, a couple of different strategies.
No. Thanks for that intro. And just for the few people who might not be aware, most people will know what service accommodation is if they know about Airbnb, but for the select few, in a nutshell, what is service accommodation, and also what is rent to rent, to show how that strategy has helped you as well?
Okay, so yeah, good question. So I mentioned I did rent to rent service accommodation. So let's break down the two components. So let's break down the first rent to rent component. What that essentially means is that you're renting a property and then I don't want to use the word subletting, but that's essentially what you're doing, subletting. Now, the first thing people think is, well, you can't do that because subletting is illegal. But what you have to do is you rent the property under your company. And because it is under your company, you're then allowed to rent it back out to your employees, clients, so on and so on. So I didn't want to use the word subletting because of the negative connotation around it, but it's all, above board or legal. You're essentially leasing a property long term and then renting it out however you want to rent it out. So that is a rent to rent component, that you're not buying property to make money, you're just renting property to make money. The second component is the service accommodation component. What that means is Airbnb, Booking.com, apartments. I think most people know what service accommodation is, not necessarily in those terms, but they know what an Airbnb is. Like an apartment or a house, just fully furnished, ready for someone to stay. So now, if you put the whole piece together, essentially what I'm doing is I'm going to a landlord saying, I want to rent your property for 3 years. Any normal property, people rent properties all the time from, to live in when they're in university, so on and so on. So I'm going to a landlord, a letting agent saying, I want to rent this apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment for 3 years. And he's saying, yep, that's absolutely fine. Then I'm putting that apartment onto Airbnb, onto Booking.com, onto some, travel website, so on and so on, and charging a higher rental. So to give an example, I've got a property in Victoria. The rent is 2,050 per month, and you can charge about £200 a night. So in about 10, 12, 13 nights, you cover all your cost, and after that, it's all profit. And I guess it just comes down to a very, very basic arbitrage game, in the sense that people buy stuff from China very, very cheap because they buy in bulk, and then they sell it on Amazon individually. So, for example, most of the stuff you buy on Amazon, someone has bought in bulk from somewhere else, and you're essentially doing the same thing, which is you're renting a property for 3 years, i.e. in bulk, and then you're renting it by the night, i.e. individually. No different to someone buying a 5,000 cutlery sets from China and then selling them one piece at a time, and you can charge a higher price because obviously they get the flexibility of buying one, not buying 5,000 at a time. So that is a model, and that is essentially how it's done, which is renting properties and then putting them back out to rent.
No, perfect. And like you said, saying it's an arbitrage game is exactly that, isn't it? You're taking it by the month, a normal buy to let, and you can rent it by the night, by the week, and you can make a lot more turnover that way.
Yeah, because essentially, if you think about what's happening is, no different to my China example, where someone is buying 5,000 of them and selling one at a time. Now, the reason the person buying pays a much higher price for the one is because, of course, they're getting the convenience of buying one. They don't have to buy the next 10 years worth of supply of cutlery, right? Because they just want the one set. So if you think about it with Airbnb, the same thing is happening, because if you want to rent a place for a month, then previously you couldn't do that. You would have to go to a letting agent and sign a 6-month AST. Whereas nowadays, people, we have corporate travelers, people are relocating, and they say, I want to book for 42 nights, and they can book for 42 nights. Whereas previously the option was 6 months or 12 months. So now they have the flexibility of 42 nights or 27 nights, exactly what they want. So they pay a premium because they're getting that convenience, whereas previously you couldn't do that. So at the end of the day, you're just paying for the convenience, no different to a convenience store. Essentially, you go to a convenience store, it's always more expensive than Tesco and all Asda and all the big stores, but you pay for the convenience that you don't want to travel all the way to a Tesco and so on because you've got one down the road. So it's really an arbitrage game, and all arbitrage games are to some degree based on convenience, that someone is saving time somewhere in the process. Like, you don't have to go to China and buy the sets and so on and so on. So it's an arbitrage game, and all arbitrage games are just based on some sort of convenience. So that's essentially what it is.
No, perfect. And there's so many variations to this particular strategy. There's so many avenues you can go down. You can go down the Premier Inn route and compete with them at the lower end. At the high end, you can compete with luxury hotels. Then there's corporate letting and loads of little niches all in the middle. What is the area that you focus on? What kind of demographic do you go after?
I personally would say the corporate demographic is the best demographic from a service accommodation point of view, purely because, with a lot of places, tourism is fine, but with most places, tourism is very, very cyclical. There's peaks and there's high season and there's low seasons. But if you look at the corporate market, there isn't really a high season and a low season because people work throughout the year. You have projects all the time. It's not like all the projects are in March and then in October there's no projects, because with corporates you sort of work all the time. No one ever packs up bags and goes home, right? So that's one of the reasons, because it's an all year round market. Second, the companies are generally paying, so they pay better rates than a family would. If a family kind of says, well, does my 3-year-old kid count as a person, or do they not count as a person? And to me, it's like, if it's a human, it's a person, right? But to them, it's kind of like, well, does it apply? Does it not apply? But from a corporate point of view, that's not how they look at it. They pay corporate rates. They pay much better rates. We had one person who a single person stayed in a 2-bedroom apartment because the company was paying. They didn't care. Whereas a family would never do that, right? If it's one person, they would book a 1-bedroom apartment. All they care about is budgets and stuff. So we had one person staying in a 2-bedroom apartment, paying us by the night for 11 months. We've had 11 months, we've had 9 months, we've had 7 months, because you see, I mentioned convenience before. Some people will say, well, if he was there for 11 months and paying by the night, it makes no sense. Why wouldn't you just get a 12-month AST and it will be, 1/3 of the price or half the price or whatever? Because see, the reason is, when he booked initially, he booked for 2 months because the company said he was going to be there for 2 months. Now, anyone who does project work will know that the biggest problem with project work is it might be finished in 2 months, or it might drag on for 3 years based on what the project is. So he didn't book for 11 months, he booked for 2 months, but then it got extended for, up to 11 months. We've had people who booked for 2 months and then they've left after, 1.5 months because the project was finished. So it sort of works both ways. I mean, but again, they pay for the convenience. Whereas if he had a project for 2 months and he signed a 6-month AST and he had to go home after 2 months, then he's lost money for the 4 months, or the company's lost money for the 4 months, and so on and so on. So it's really the convenience they're paying for. I like the corporate model because there's more money in it. It's an all year round market. The clients are better. They stay for longer. It's just better.
Yeah, no, it seems to make sense. They're representing the company, so you would expect them to be on good behaviour. They're not going to split hairs about who's staying there because it's not their money, and the company are going to do things right, you would hope. So it makes sense, the fact that it's an all year round situation, and yeah, repeat business from that point of view seems ideal as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's just a much safer bet to go with the company route. But now keep in mind, I'm not necessarily saying tourism doesn't work or you shouldn't be an area which has tourism. If you can have a blend of both, that's even better. So for example, think let's just say London as an example. You have tourism and you have corporates, right? And there's probably a lot of these locations where you have the blend of both, and that's fine, and that's even better. But some areas, even like Bournemouth. Oh, you're from Bournemouth. You are,
Yes.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
Bournemouth.
So
Okay, so we were speaking about this last week. I spoke in Bournemouth almost 2 years ago now. I think April of 2018 or something. Bournemouth PPN, and someone said to me, well, how would service accommodation work in Bournemouth? Because it's great when the sun's out and everyone's on the beach, but what happens when the sun goes out, right? And there's no one on the beach anymore. So they looked at service accommodation purely from a tourism point of view, and they rejected it because the concern was, well, what happens when it's there's no sun? But Bournemouth actually has the global, I think one of the head offices from a JP Morgan tech department is in Bournemouth. They have a building which is just a tech department. And now, if you know anything about service accommodation or the tech industry, that if you have the tech department of one of these banks, you have hundreds of contractors from South India, because South India, the labor is much cheaper, and they're very qualified. They understand tech, so they bring a lot of people for contract work, and of course they need short-term accommodation. So I said that to someone. There happened to be a letting agent in the room that day, and she said she gets calls all the time from Bangalore, Chennai, those sort of places, people asking for accommodation, which makes sense because they have the tech half of JP Morgan there. So sometimes people look at places like Bournemouth and stuff, and they reject it, thinking, well, what's going to happen in those areas? But they never evaluate the corporate side of it, like what companies are here, what banks are here, what industries, science park, research park. and so on and so on. And you can make very good money there.
Now that's interesting because most people look at Bournemouth, like you said, on the face of it, and they see a holiday destination. They see a lot of hotels, a lot of B&Bs, and dismiss it on the surface. But like you said, each location has its own niche, own hub of corporate jobs, corporate companies, and a bit of research would help you unveil what avenues there are, what opportunities there are within that location.
For sure, that would be the best thing to do. Just find out why people are coming to your area.
So on that, obviously addressing the current situation, COVID-19, it has had such an impact on the hospitality industry. How have you been able to navigate through this? I mean, that's a big question for a lot of people in hotels, and that some people have been able to let, some people haven't. How have you been able to deal with this?
Yeah, so the best way is the longer term bookings. That is really what I found the only real solution. Travel is so restricted that there's not that many people moving around so much, but there are people who are sort of looking for longer term accommodation, whether that's because they want to stay separate from their family, or whether we had a doctor who was here, and then obviously all the flights got cancelled, and he extended for 2 months because his stuff got extended. We had some insurance bookings. Again, people had to move out of their house for whatever reasons. So we've had a lot of long bookings, i.e., 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, but we haven't really had any which are 3 nights, 4 nights, 5 nights, because people are not really moving that much on a short-term basis. But what we found was people are still people still need short-term accommodation. But when I say short, I don't mean 1 night, 2 nights. I mean sort of like 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, either because they're stuck in the country and they can't go back, or they were here initially for a few months for some sort of work and that's been extended because they were in the healthcare industry, or just things like those. And I think what's been different with my service accommodation business compared to most people is everyone I speak to, they seem to rely very heavily on what they call OTAs, online travel agents. So that's Airbnb and that's Booking.com. And that is the world of service accommodation, Airbnb and Booking.com. But I've been saying to people for years that the real money is in the corporate stuff. It's in the long-term stuff, i.e., corporate agencies and travel agencies and stuff. And we've been working with those guys for about 3 years now. So when it comes to something like this, we're not reliant on just Airbnb and Booking.com like everyone. We have Airbnb and Booking.com probably makes up like 20% of my bookings or 25% of my bookings. The rest is everything long term, and that's been the case for 3 years. So when something like this comes along, I'm not saying it's great because everyone's bookings are impacted. Even some of the longer ones are impacted. Even some of the longer ones are obviously a lot less than what they were previously. Previously, we're getting inquiries all the time. Now we're getting inquiries here and there. But luckily, in most locations, with the inquiries here and there, it's been able to cover costs, or it's been able to, for example, I'll give you an example. We had one booking for 3 months, and because the rates are so good with those bookings, one apartment covered the cost of 3 apartments because how much money we made from that one. So we've been, thankfully, we've been profitable because of those, but we haven't been ridiculously profitable. So it's nothing to scream about. Let's just put it that way.
Absolutely, and anyone making money, especially the last couple of months, the last few months, everything helps really stay afloat, doesn't it? At the end of the day, it's
last month. Surprisingly, we had a very good month. One apartment made 2,700. One made 1,700. One made 1,600. Last month we had a very good month. But then there were 2 or 3 apartments which barely made anything. But the ones which made 1,700, 1,800, 2,600, whatever that was, it made so much that it covered all the rest. So overall, what I'm saying is that we've still been profitable, but nothing amazing. Whereas some individual apartments here and there, because of the long-term bookings, they've done very well. But normally, what happens is all of them are long-term. But right now, because the long-term bookings are slow as well, what we're saying is, every other apartment has the long-term booking. So if we have 4 apartments, let's say 2 have the long-term bookings in, and 2 sort of don't have that much. But because the 2 which do have the long-term bookings, they make so much that the other 2 don't really become a concern.
No, that makes perfect sense. That's great. That's good to hear, actually, from that point of view. And going back to the strategy itself, can we go through an example, a case study? I think it's a great way for people to learn about how you were doing your service accommodation units. Were they just flats? Were they other houses in there as well? Maybe you can pick a location and tell us of a past project.
Yeah, so I'll give an example of something we have in Stevenage in Hertfordshire because that's where I live. So this is from last month. So typically we rent two-bedroom apartments because my market is the corporate market, and corporate market prefer apartments to houses. That's a bit of a general statement, but the reason is that, if you think about it, the corporate industry, especially if they're coming from overseas, they don't have cars, they don't have a lot of transport. So they use public transport. So if you're closer to the town center, um, it's better for them because there's a train there, there's bus routes, and so on and so on. And generally, in most places in the town center, you get apartments, you don't get houses. So that's why we stick to apartments. So two-bedroom apartments in Stevenage, the rent will be something like 1,000 a month, 1,050 a month, around that sort of rate. We can then rent that property out at about £120 a night. So £120 a night times that by 30 becomes something like 3,600. My cost is 1,300, around that sort of mark. And that is a difference of, well, in that case, about 2,700 because we've had a long-term booking. And we've seen that a lot over the years. We saw that last month. So that is essentially what the model breakdown is from that point of view, in the sense that you're renting something and you're really just renting it back out to agencies, Airbnb, Booking.com at a higher rate. The model itself is very, very simplistic. Of course, now there's a lot of small steps in terms of finding the right area, finding the right deal, so on and so on. But I think the overview of the model is very, very simple, which is essentially you have to find an area which has the biggest margin. So when we speak about arbitrage, like we did earlier, all you're trying to do is find an area which has the biggest margin between what you're going to pay as a monthly rent and what you think you can charge on a nightly basis. And if you have an area with a good enough margin, then it's just a case of finding more and more deals like that in that area, and you're pretty much good to go.
And it's like you said, getting that high margin, but also getting that high occupancy rate, which is why you've gone down the corporate. There's no point having really high margin with some holiday places, really high margin, but you only rented out 10 or 15% of a month.
Unless you're 10 or 15%, your rates are so ridiculously high that it covered everything. And it's rare, but you can kind of get those type of properties. Like, for example, some people have these huge properties, like 8, 9 bed properties, which are really designed for groups. And if they get 4 nights a month, they make so much that they pretty much cover all their costs. But generally, that's not the case. Generally, you have to have at least half the month booked in order to cover your cost. Generally, that's pretty much what the rule is. I'll tell you a very, very simple rule, actually, that anyone who's looking to do this, all you have to do is get your rent and check on Airbnb and Booking.com. Can you charge as a nightly rate 10% of your rent? So if your rent is £1,000, can you charge at least £100 a night? And if you can charge £100 a night, you'll cover your cost in 15 nights a month, half the month, and the rest will be profitable. Whereas if you go on Airbnb and Booking.com and your rent is £1,000, and you're supposed to have at least £100 a night, if it says everyone's only charging £50 a night, then it's not going to work because it doesn't meet the 10% rule. And you can actually apply the 10% rule in any part of the country, and it actually does sort of work. So that is a quick way of doing it, which sort of tells you if it's going to work in your area or not, which is an Airbnb Booking.com rate 10% of what the rental is? And if that is the case, assume there's other factors and stuff, but as a rule of thumb, that should be fine. But yeah, you're right. You have half the month to cover your cost generally.
No,
Same
that's a
same with
great.
same with any sort of wholesale stuff, which is if you buy 5,000 units from China, yeah, you probably have to sell 2,000 to cover your cost, and the last 3,000 is going to be your profit. So the same thing applies.
Well, that's what's interesting about this particular strategy, investment strategy. It is a business, isn't it? And you need to look at it and run the figures like a business. There's a lot of moving parts. There's the cleaning to consider. There's the laundry. There's check-ins, check-outs, payments, bookings. And unless you want to do it all yourself, which I'm sure most people don't, you've got to have important systems in place, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I think at one stage we had about 43 of these units running, and been a big proponent saying you can do everything off a phone. But people, for some reason, don't believe me. For some reason, I don't know why. But we had 43 units, and there was no staff. It was just me and like a business partner, and we were running the whole thing from, 2 iPhones. So that's very much doable. I think the thing with the phone is a lot of people challenge me on this phone situation, saying you can't do everything off a phone. But my argument is that I'm not saying I don't use a laptop, by the way. But what I'm saying is this, that I can do everything off a phone, because a phone in 2020 can do anything a laptop can. That's just fact. There is nothing a phone can't do, like a Android, iPhone, whatever, like a new one, that a laptop can't do. The only reason I use the laptop is because it's faster to type and stuff, and it's easier to navigate. But if I only had a phone, I can do everything off a phone. So, and you really think about it, what can you do on your laptop nowadays that you can't do on a phone? Because there is nothing. Whatever you can do on a phone, you can do on a laptop, and vice versa. So if you can do it on a laptop, and everyone seems to believe you can do it on a laptop but not on a phone, it's just a case of getting the same app on the phone, and you can do everything off a phone. And nowadays there's an app for everything. You think you imagine something and it's got an app for it. Like there's apps for like the stupidest things as well. There's apps like find toilets and all. Okay, not saying that's stupid, but I'm just saying there's there are apps for everything. So service accommodation. If I was to give you a quick rundown, if a guest is to make a booking, or let's say you made a booking in the past somewhere and on Airbnb or something, guest makes a booking to my property. They ask a bunch of questions. I don't have to answer the questions. The app answers the questions, and not even automated, not even like some robot answering it. A human answers it, but it's through a third-party app. Then the payment is automatically taken. Then the check-in instructions are automatically sent. The checkout instructions are automatically sent. When that's happened, the cleaners are automatically notified, and the security deposits automatically taken. And the list goes on and on and on. There's hardly anything you have to do if you have the correct systems in place, but it implies you have the correct systems in place.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've made me think, using the 80-20 principle, which app do you reckon you use 80% of the time for your your service accommodation business?
You need a thing called a channel manager, and there's loads of channel managers. So the one I use is called Guesty, but you can find other ones. And if you have the channel manager, that will do that one app will do 80% of the work, if not more. That's all you need.
Perfect.
And if you because that is the channel manager is essentially the central hub which controls everything. Controls the pricing, controls the payments, controls the communication. Think of a channel manager as like a reception desk of a hotel. That's essentially what it is. It is the place where everything gets done. The IDs, the payments, the availability. When you call the hotel and you say, is the room available, so on and so on. A channel manager is the reception desk of a hotel, but online on your phone.
Perfect. And what's the name of the one that you use again, just in case people want to know that?
Yeah, I use Guesty, Guesty.
Perfect. So it's interesting. It's a strategy that has, like you said, relatively low barriers to entry to an extent. If someone wants to just test it on their house for a couple of weeks, they can rent it out. And if they don't like it, they can stop. I'm not saying that's the best way. I'm not advising that. And obviously, if they have a buy-to-let,
that's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I know people who've done that actually. They go on holiday for a couple of weeks. Yeah.
The best one is, well, there's even a better one, which is, some people, what they do is they test it, right? They say, well, I'm not sure this is. There's probably a lot of people listen to this and they're probably thinking, well, this is not going to work in my area, or this strategy is crap, and so on and so on. So what I would say is this: everyone should do this, and nothing's going to happen. The police is not going to contact you and be like, what the hell is happening? Like, nothing's going to happen. I want to put a disclaimer out saying I'm not saying,
yeah,
but nothing's going to happen. Like, come on, guys. So what everyone should do is everyone should take nice pictures of their house and list their house on Airbnb and put it on inquiry mode only. Don't put it on instant booking, because then someone's going to book your house. But put it on inquiry only. Take some nice pictures and see what happens. So people have done this in the past. I know someone who did this on their house, and they actually got a booking for £4,750 or something for like 1 month, right? Now they did it as an experiment, but they got a £4,700 booking. So then the big question became, well, shall we go on holiday for a month while while we rent it out for a month or something? But that happens all the time. People think
Yeah.
it's not going to work in my area. So even if you do HMOs right now, or you do development and you have no interest in service accommodation, even as a fun exercise, maybe just put your house on, and do some research as to what you can charge for it, or if you have a spare room, put a spare room on. So of course there's mortgages involved and so on and so on. So that's a separate matter. But I'm not saying rent it out. I'm saying just test it to see, well, would it even work or would it not work? I'm not saying, do it or whatever. I'm just saying test it to see if it's going to work or not. And, it would not surprise me at all if someone got a £3,000 booking or £4,000 booking.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's just important for people to know that before you actually do rent it out, beware of your freeholder or your lender. You've got to check those permissions if you're actually going to let it out properly.
All that sort of stuff. But just to test it out to see if you would even get any inquiries or not. You're not really breaking any rules.
Back to the original question on that about the hobbyist, let's say, who might test things out. What are the pitfalls that you see time and time again from people who are almost just dipping their toe into this industry? What do they tend to miss out?
I would say one of the big ones is, of course, the automation side of things, because at the end of the day, let's say you have a really good deal and you make £1,000 a month, but it takes you 10 hours a day to make £1,000 a month. Well, that's not a very good setup, because even though you're making good money, it's taking so much time that your hourly rate is worth nothing. So automation is one, because people underestimate how much work it is without automation. The second one I would say is just marketing as a whole, because I always say to people, you should do the Airbnb and Booking.com, but then there's also other ways of marketing which are so easy. It's just people don't do them for some reason, because what happens is, Airbnb and Booking.com makes you so much money that you think, well, I'll sort of do it later, and no one ever really gets around to it, because you're getting £200 a night just from Airbnb and Booking.com, whereas if you did the corporate stuff, you'd make even more on top. So that's what I would say. I think fine tune the marketing, but also the big one is automation, because if you get a good enough area, you can do no automation and you can do everything badly, but you can make £1,000 a month because the area is so good and the rates are so good. But if even if you make £1,000 a month, or let's say you make £2,000 a month, but you're spending 6, 7, 8, 9 hours a day doing it, that's still not a good deal, because that's so much time spent for your £2,000 a month that it's just almost pointless. So whereas if you can have some systems in place, I firmly believe you can manage one whole apartment in like 10 minutes a day, fully automated. So that's what I would say. Automation is really the big one here, because think about it, even from the world of property, people who get into service accommodation who are in the property world, they're used to buy to lets, HMOs, i.e. someone goes in there for 9 months or 12 months and you don't hear from them for 9 to 12 months. Service accommodation, there's 3 people going in every single night, so it's in and out, and people don't realize how much work that is without automation. It's ridiculous. So I would say if you're going to do it without automation, there's almost no point because of the workload. So that would be number one. And I would say you really got to do a bit of time, spend a bit of time researching the area. So I mentioned before, there's a 10% rule. I've seen people take deals on which are really at the 5% mark, and my rule is 10%. So I can tell you it's not going to work. Like, forget the automation, forget the marketing. It's never going to work at 5%. It has to be really around the 10%. And I don't mean 10%. It could be 9%. It could be 8%. But it's really got to be around that sort of mark, not 3, 4, 5%. So area, automation, marketing.
Like you said, with the area, if you get the area right, you can tweak and fine tune the rest, can't you? But you can be the best marketer, you can be the best at automation, but if you're not getting the bookings and you haven't got the right area or you haven't got the right clientele, then you're never going to get there.
You can have the most automated thing in the world, but if you aren't getting any bookings, there's nothing to automate, because you aren't getting any bookings. So automation doesn't really matter from that point of view. I'm saying, assuming you have a good area, automation becomes like very, very important. But yeah, the number one would be area, and I think that's true for the whole of property. To be honest, even with buy to lets and stuff, you can have an amazing deal on paper, but if it's a bad area and tenants end up smashing the place every 2 months, then it doesn't really matter what the yield is on paper because they keep smashing the place every 2 months. Not that that happens. I don't think it happens anyway. But I think the same applies with HMOs. That if you have an area which on paper is good, but tenants are not staying that long, or there's a lot of voids or whatever, it's probably not the best example, but you get the point, which is area is always number one. If you have an area where you can't fill your HMO rooms, automation is not going to do anything. Can't get anyone in the flipping room.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to quickly just touch on the commercial valuation side of things. So if you bought a property and now that you're getting a higher turnover, how difficult is it to get that commercial valuation and lock in that higher value potentially for that property?
Okay, so obviously when I do my service accommodation stuff, I mainly just do rent to rent. So I don't really apply for commercial valuations from that point of view because obviously I'm renting the property as opposed to owning the property. If you went for, if you owned the property and you were doing service accommodation and you went for the commercial valuations and stuff, I believe you have to show 7 months worth of records as service accommodation, and then they would base it on the level of income, average income, after those 7 months, and you would get a valuation, based on income and so on and so on. I think generally, if you're in the south, it's probably true for HMOs as well, that the bricks and mortar valuation tends to be higher than the commercial income based valuation. So there might be no point unless you're up north where everything is much cheaper. Whereas especially if you're in London, I mean the commercial valuation is going to be a bit tricky. The bricks and mortar is probably going to be worth more than the commercial. But yeah, that's what you would have to do. I believe, from what I know, you have to show 7 months for the records, but I might be wrong because it's not something I've done. I've spent my time just doing rent to rent or management, those sort of models where, because I don't own the property, I'm not really applying for any of those sort of things, if that makes sense.
And going back to some of the mistakes that you might have made. Now, we talked about the hobbyists and just getting in, and people have problems with automation. When you start scaling up to 40 units, what were some of the challenges that you faced then?
I think one of the big one was, we keep talking about automation and stuff. I think what happens is sometimes when you're at a smaller level, you have some cracks in the systems which you don't really care too much about because the thinking is, well, I'll sort of just do that anyway. I'll just do that myself, or I'll just fix that myself, and so on and so on. Because there's only 3 units to worry about. I'm not going to build a whole process around it. Whereas once you get bigger and bigger and you have more and more apartments, those cracks, they start to get bigger and bigger and bigger, because that small thing which you used to do here and there, now you're doing all the time because you have tenfold the number of apartments. Or some things that you didn't really consider. So for example, like, with service accommodation, there has to be a payment process to make sure you don't get any credit card fraud and all that sort of stuff, So whereas when you have 3 or 4 apartments, some of the things you can just manually do because there's only 3 or 4 apartments. You don't have, there's not that much to do, and it might just take you 2 minutes here and there. But once you have 43, you can't keep doing that again and again. So the system really has to be better. So what I would say is the one thing is, you should, when you're building your system, you should, really judge on, well, if I had 100 apartments, does it still work? Does it still hold? Like, or will I need to hire 10 people in order to run this? Because you see, when it comes to automation, it's really interesting. A system is essentially just a process. So for example, the analogy I use is, think of something like McDonald's. A lot of people think a system means an app or a piece of software or some sort of technology, but a system doesn't necessarily mean that. If you think about McDonald's, a system is the guy gets a bag of chips, he puts them into the frying pan thing, right? And then he lowers it. As soon as he lowers it, the green light or something comes on with like a 2-minute timer. That happens. He presses a button, it goes up, he then moves it to the next station. That is not an app which is doing it. That is a human doing step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So that is what a system is. A system is really just a set of processes. What requires apps is automation. systems is just processes. Automation is step two, which is, well, okay, now I've got step one, step two, step three, step four, step five, which I'm doing all the time. Well, how do I jump from step one all the way to step five? And that's where automation comes in. So system is just a process. Automation, apps, technology is jumping from step one to step five. So it's not taking all your time. And so what I mean to say is when you have 3 or 4 apartments, you might have a system in place, i.e. I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. And when you have 3 apartments, that's fine. It doesn't take that much time. But trying to do that for 43 is now you multiply that by tenfold, and it takes a lot of time. So then you got to start thinking, well, if I had 100 apartments, could I still be doing all of this, or would I have to hire more staff? And most of the time, the answer is no, because there isn't automation. So I think that's one of the big things, really setting up your business to be in a place where you can take on more apartments rather than just being purpose built for what it is currently. If you're raising money from investors, I say this all the time, if you're raising money from investors, do you have a process whereby could you do this tenfold? Could you meet 10 times more people and could you have the same presentation to 10 times more people? And could you replicate that process again and again? Or is it a case of, this one guy through this random connection you had through, this random one event you went to? Because that's not really repeatable. You can't keep doing that again and again if it's just all chance and random and stuff. So I think whenever you build a process around anything, whether it's raising money or systems and because of operations, you really got to think, well, if I was to do this tenfold, would that still work? And if it does still work, then that's pretty good. And if it doesn't, then there's obviously something to fix. Happens with raising money all the time. This is why I think most people don't raise a lot of money, in my opinion, which is because whatever they're doing is just a one-off activities rather than, okay, I'm going to put out this many Facebook posts, then I'm going to get, this many leads, and I'm going to send this many investment proposals out, or whatever the process is. Most of the time is, well, I met this guy 3 years ago at an event, and then this happened, and then this happened, and he said he wanted to invest. But you can't repeat that. You can't say to someone, my process of raising money is this. That's just off chance that thing happened. So if you can really get it down to a process and you can repeat it, then you can get employees who can repeat it or automation to repeat it. And
yeah, that's very interesting. Thinking a step ahead, not just thinking about the process and having a system in place, but having an automated system in place. And taking it back to the very simple example, you can, guests can phone you and you can take bookings over the phone. That's a process. You could outsource that to someone else and they can take bookings over a phone. But to go one step further, like you said, do you just have a payment app? And they just book in automatically and it's done straight away. You don't have to hire that person. You don't have to do it. Yes, you could do it on 5 apartments, or that person could do it on 5 or 6. But when you're looking ahead at scaling over 100 apartments, that system's not going to work. It's going to break very quickly, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's a very good point, and that's exactly what I meant. Which is, if you have something which is reliant, which is fine for 5 apartments, it does not mean it's going to be okay for 50 apartments or 100 apartments, because like you're saying, that thing would break very, very quickly unless you started hiring more staff. But then you got to pay more money and so on and so on. Whereas if you're saying if you had the payment version of this, which all required was an automated click and it was all done, it doesn't matter if you have 1 apartment or 500 apartments, because you don't need any more staff. The process remains the same, and so on and so on. So yeah, that's a good example.
So we've been touching on it a little bit, and I want to segue completely and talk about marketing, social media, and awareness. How important has that been for your business, and does that give people a massive competitive advantage?
Yes, I mean, and I'll explain this. Whatever you buy, whether it's a phone, whether it's a soft drink, whatever that is, if they did a blind test and they took off the labels, most of the time people can't tell. You take off. Some people say, well, I know what's Coke and what's Pepsi, but if you did a blind test on most things, like for example, if you said to me, a phone has 120 gigabytes and a 7 megapixel camera, they might be talking about your phone, which might be an Android, or they might be talking about my phone, which is like an iPhone. So what I'm saying is the core features of most products are exactly the same. I actually have no idea how many megapixels these cameras are nowadays, and so on and so on. And I probably couldn't tell the difference between Coke and Pepsi. But only when you put the label on can you tell the difference between two products for most people. So really, if you think about it, people are buying a label, they're not buying the product because, just think about it in your life. Think about all the stuff you buy. If you take the labels off, you probably can't tell the difference between the two things, right? So now let's go to the world of property. Anyone listening? Let's say there's two people offering an investment. I'm offering a 10% return and you're offering a 10% return. So the product, i.e. without the label, is exactly the same. So now if someone has, would someone invest with you or would someone invest with me? Now, if they don't know who I am, but they've been listening to your podcast for 3 years, they're going to say, well, I'm going to invest with him because I know who this guy is. I don't know who the hell the other guy is, but the product is exactly the same. I'm offering 10% and you're offering 10%. One guy's offering a phone with 120 gigabytes and the other company is offering 120 gigabytes. So if you think about it, the only thing which differentiates is the label, because that's how people make decisions, because people believe in brands. They prefer certain brands, they prefer what they stand for. There's trust involved, all those sort of things, all those sort of things which you can't really put on a piece of paper. Because, well, how do you account for trust on a piece of paper? It's not like you don't get a 10% return plus 3% trust. You just sort of believe, this guy's going to get my money back with a 10% return. So if you understand, that's how people make decisions. That they don't buy a product, they buy the label, and that is true. Because go downstairs to your kitchen or go to your bedroom or whatever, and you will see everything's got a label on it. From a psychology point of view, it is safer to buy a label than to buy a non-label. The reason is, if I'm going to spend £1,000 on a phone, the other phone might be better than an iPhone. It might be 10 times better than an iPhone. But if it's a company I've never heard of before, there is a slight chance that it might be a bogus company with a crap product and it just looks good on paper, and I've wasted £1,000. Whereas the safer option is, well, it's Apple. I know they're not going to shut up shop tomorrow. They're not going to sell me a one-off dodgy product. They've been in the market for so long, so on and so on. And all those things have got nothing to do with the phone itself. It's just reputation. It's just trust. It's just branding. Nothing which goes on a piece of paper. So if you understand that, you look at property and you realize very, very quickly, everyone in property, if you're trying to raise money, let's just say, is offering exactly the same product. Now, you might be offering 7%, I might be offering 8%, the other guy might be offering 10%. But at the end of the day, the product is exactly the same. Everyone's offering a fixed return, or I'm being generalistic here, or everyone's offering like a joint venture. They're pretty much, there's only like 3 products anyone's offering. So then the question becomes, well, why would someone buy your product as opposed to the other guys? Like, what do you have different? Because everyone's got the same thing. Everyone's got the 10% return. And then it all comes down to trust, branding, who people recognize more, and so on and so on and so on. No different to how anything in this world is bought. So going back to social media, it doesn't matter if it's social media. It could be anything. You could put your name on a billboard, for example. I don't think social media is a tool, and the reason social media is so popular is because everyone is on social media and it's free and it's easy to do, and so on and so on. But you just have to have visibility, and you just have to have branding. That is really the key here, because if anyone's going to buy your product, it's going to be based on those things.
Yeah, the platforms will change. Like you said, social media, it could be Facebook, it could be Instagram, it could be whatever platform it is, but those platforms will change over time. A billboard 50 years ago would have been the best way to have the advertising, maybe not so much at the moment, but it might come back again. Who knows? Same with TV ads. So the platforms change, like you said, but it's important to keep marketing and keep getting the brand out there. And going back to service accommodation, say I have a 1-bedroom flat or a 2-bedroom and you have a 2-bedroom, they're exactly the same. You might get yours let faster because you have a brand. You might be able to charge a premium price because you have a brand. And the most important one, I would think, is, can you let direct and cut out the booking fees, which could be 10, 15% on your margin, which goes straight on your bottom line. That's, most businesses would love to make 15% a year, at the end of the day. So is that been helpful to you, having a brand for your products, for your apartments, just say? That repeat business, that letting direct, has that really helped you?
So I've I've always used branding not necessarily for the apartments, but for myself, i.e., to raise money, to do speaking events, to get paid for speaking, and so on and so on. Where I had some companies who wanted to sponsor some stuff, and so on and so on. So there's two distinctions here. One is your personal brand, i.e., yourself. The second one is some sort of company brand, i.e., you're branding an apartment company, and so on and so on. I've never pushed the company brands too much because my objective has always been a bit different. Always wanted to focus on myself as opposed to, seems a bit narcissistic, but I wanted to focus on myself because I think in the world of property, you yourself are the product. When you're trying to raise money, the person buys into you, not the company. I have no idea what your company is called, but I know who you are, and I think that generally applies to a lot of people in the world of property, which is, when you're networking and you're posting on social media, people will invest in you as opposed to your limited company. Now, of course, they will, give the money to the company and stuff, but I'm just saying they will invest because of you, not because of the company's name, right? Generally, in most cases. So I've always focused on branding for myself, because I think in the world of property, you already are the product yourself. And I have the feeling that if you want to do bigger things in property, bigger deals and stuff, the more known you are, the bigger your own brand is, the better off you will be. So that's why I've always sort of stuck to personal branding as opposed to company branding, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I guess the end game would be both, right? So we know who Apple is, and we know who Steve Jobs was. We know what Facebook is, and everyone knows who Mark Zuckerberg is. So, and then that company can go off and do other things, but so can that person. I mean, that is the absolute end game, isn't it? Really.
Well, yeah, 100%. I think in an ideal world, both is better. I'm just coming from the point of view that when you're starting out and you have a limited time, and if you had to choose one, and you have limited resources, limited time, limited money, and so on and so on. I just when I was starting out, I've made the decision that because I wanted to do other things in property as well, as opposed to just service accommodation. So like I said, in the last 15 months, we're on to our fifth development in the last 15, 16 months. So I knew I wanted to get into other things as well. So for me, it was important to get myself known as well. So that's why I stuck to sort of branding myself, because I knew I had limited time. But yeah, in an ideal world, if you had the capabilities, then yeah, a company brand and a personal brand would both would be even more ideal. But I think I think you mentioned something earlier, which I believe in quite a lot, is the whole 80-20 principle. And I try to use that a lot, which is which 20% of the things will get you 80% of the results. Because what I find is that people focus on they focus on too many things, and second, even if they focus within the many things they focus on too many things which don't really get that many results, because they're focusing on 80% of the work, which gets you really 20% of the results. So I'm a very, very big believer in doing as less as possible, but those few things should really make out the bulk of the results, right? Because otherwise what ends up happening is you end up doing 20 things, but all 20 of those things you do, just okay. You're just okay at doing 20 things. Whereas if you can get really, really good at doing 2 things, then you're going to be more known for those 2 things. People are going to pay you more money for those 2 things. And overall, your 2 things will beat the 20 things. And I think the reason people focus on 20 things as opposed to 2 things, and I did this as well, which is you think it's safer to spread your risk by going 20 things. I'll do a bit of HMO, I'll do a bit of service accommodation, I'll do a bit of buy-to-let, I'll do a bit of deal packaging, because that way, if one of them doesn't work, then I still have the other 3 which are going to make me money. And that's what I was thinking anyway. But very quickly you realize, well, none of these are going to make you any money, because you're not going to be good at any of these 3 or these 4, because you're spending 25% of your time in every single one, which is not going to get you anywhere. So you really, I would say step 1 is focus on narrow down your things to maybe 1 thing you do, service accommodation, or 2 things you do, service accommodation, and 1 more thing, or whatever that is for you. And then within that thing, which 20% of things is going to make me 80% of the results? So let's go with service accommodation for now, right? I know that Airbnb, Booking.com, and my service accommodation agencies, will get me 95% of my bookings. I can run Facebook ads, I can do direct marketing, I can call up companies, I can do Facebook groups, I can do all that sort of stuff. And that will probably give me 5% of my bookings, because and those other three things will give me 95% of my bookings. And those other three things I can do very, very quickly in 20% of the time. Whereas I see people spending so much time doing all these small things here and there, running around all the time, but it doesn't really equate to much results. So you really got to think about, well, what are the things which are going to equate to the big results, and really get really, really good at those few things. I think with anything, it's like, there's this Bruce Lee, or I don't know, I can't remember what the guy is. He's got this line, which is, practice one move 10,000 times, not 10,000 moves once, or something. Have you heard this quote?
No, I'm very surprised. As soon as you said Bruce Lee, I was like, well, no, I'm sure I'll get this, but no, I didn't.
No, I'm pretty sure it's a Bruce Lee quote, which is, master practice one move 10,000 times rather than 10,000 moves once, because then you get really, really good at that one move, and whenever you need that one move, you can just do it without even thinking. Whereas
it's that jack of all trade, master of none, isn't it?
Yeah, same thing, and that's what happens, because I think people are really trying to spread their risk. That if this one doesn't work, I'll do that one, but then it's like nothing works.
I find they also, again, I mean, I've fallen foul to this as well. Like, you get in the routine of becoming a busy fool. You just want to prove to yourself that you're being busy, that you are doing things. They might not be the right things, but you're just getting on and doing loads and loads of things. Or it's shiny penny syndrome as well, isn't it? New strategy comes on the scene. You're finding some friction in your strategy, and all of a sudden you think, oh, that's probably better. I'll probably get better results in that one. But you never go deep in anything then. There's always going to be frictions and challenges in everything, and I find you have to go deep in one of them to get really good at it. All the strategies make money. That was what I was trying to get at, is what you said at the very start. All the strategies can make money. It's the one that's right for you. Don't be a busy fool doing loads of different things. Focus on the one that you enjoy, that you get 80% of the results from, the 20% of the effort as well. But you have to enjoy it, and that's where you're going to go deep, I think. We've talked a lot about, the last conversation, a bit about behaviors and habits. I mean, you've come out of university, within a few years, you've built up to 40 deals, doing all the things that you're doing in property, building your business. What are some of the habits and behaviors that you've adopted straight from the start that have really helped you become successful in what you're doing?
So I think we mentioned one of the big ones, which is focusing on a few things. And I think people really, really underestimate that one. There's a book called The One Thing by Gary Keller, I believe the name is. And he gives you a lot of examples of people who sort of follow this rule of the one thing, i.e. focus on the one thing. And you read it and you sort of agree with it, and you're like, you can see why it makes sense, and then no one does it, right? Which is because, and I think it all comes down to, because you think it's better off spreading your risk, spreading everything. So if something doesn't work, then the others sort of pick up for it. Or at the start, what happens is when you try something, try a new strategy or something, you want to do everything. You want to do this, and you want to do this, and you want to do this. Whatever you see other people doing, you just want to do everything. And then the same thing happens. You get nowhere, because you're trying to do so much. And it's not actually a time thing. I think this is where people get it wrong. People say, well, I've got time, or I'll find the time, and I'll slot in 3 hours extra here, and I'll sort of get those extra things done, or I'll do something on the weekend. It's actually got nothing to do with time, I think. Because what happens is, even if you have the time to do it, the problem is, because you have 16 things, you don't have the same mind space. Like, you can't think clearly, because when you're doing one of the things and then you get 15 other small things to do, you're always a bit distracted. You're always in a bit of a hurry, thinking, well, I got to do this one really quickly because I've got to move on to the next thing. And then you don't really do the first thing properly. Or you have a bit of confusion, like, well, which of the 16 should I do today? Or which of the 16 is the most important? Or, which of the 16, blah, blah, blah. And you spend so much time in confusion because there's so much happening. Whereas, when you're in the planning stage, you're like, well, I'll do 10 minutes here, and then I'll go to my, morning run, and then I'll come back from my morning run, and I'll do my second thing. And it fits on your calendar. That's not the issue. The issue is it doesn't fit in your head. because it just confuses the hell out of you. That, like, what am I supposed to be doing? And especially when you're starting out on something and everything is a bit confusing anyway, now you just end up adding more confusion on top of that, and the whole thing just crumbles. I think the biggest mistake I saw people make starting out was just doing too much. They were like, I'm going to do a bit of HMO, a bit of service accommodation, a bit of this, a bit of that, and it ends up getting nowhere. So I think I would very religiously follow the rule of the one thing. Just do one thing, get better at that one thing. Even on a day, I only really schedule 3 tasks a day. I don't do more than 3 tasks a day, but with those 3 tasks, I don't feel time pressure that I have to do it in the next 20 minutes because I've got 15 other things. I take my time because I know if I do this thing well, I don't have to 10 days later come and do it again because I didn't do it properly the first time. Whereas sometimes what happens is when I used to rush things, I do it very, very quickly. A week later, something which is a task associated with this task, it wouldn't work because I didn't do the first thing properly. Now I've got to spend 2 more hours trying to fix the first one. And, you're just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So I would say that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think too many people try, this is like a general thing, not even necessarily, property related, but I think too many people try to be, I don't know if it's an ego thing or what, but like when it comes to habits, there's 2 ways of building habits. One is that, you just say, well, I've changed and from now on, I'm going to, follow my diet and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And you almost feel like very, I don't know, like macho or whatever, thinking I'm going to do all these new things. And then obviously it doesn't really work after 3 days. And willpower sort of diminishes throughout the day. There's a lot of studies on this, which is when you wake up, if you think about it, it's going off tangent a bit. I was always of the thing that, well, why do I have to wake up early? I can just stay up late and do all my work late at night, which kind of makes sense because the number of hours in the day are exactly the same. So why does it matter if I wake up in the morning early, if I go to sleep late? Number of hours are the same, right? Still 24 hours, you sleep 8, so you still have 16. So that never made sense to me, especially because I finished university, and in university, no one wakes up early. It's like, that's not really a thing. So I was always of the mindset that, well, I'll just, sleep later, wake up later, because to me, it was about number of hours. But someone made a really good point. I was reading an article that if you think about it, all good habits are in the morning and all bad habits are at night, i.e., you don't waste time texting in the morning. Like, for example, 8, 9, 10 a.m., you're not sitting there just texting all the time, because when you're doing your work and you get a text message, you'll say, well, I'll do it in a bit because I'm doing my work. If that's 9 p.m. and you get a text, you start texting while you're working because you're like, well, it's 9 p.m., I've had a long day, whatever, and you're texting while you're working. Same with junk food. People eat more junk food later on in the day than they do in the morning, right? I mean, you can consider cereal as junk or not, that's up to you. But I'm just saying in general, if you think about it, junk food is normally later, texting is later, people watch movies later in the day, TV later in the day, so on and so on. So all bad habits are generally, again, I'm being generalistic, but all bad habits are generally, towards the end of the day, and all good habits are in the morning. You go for a morning run, whatever, all that sort of stuff. So because they found that your willpower sort of like diminishes throughout the day because you're getting more and more tired, more tired, more tired. You've been working more and more and more. And by the end of the day, if there's some cake or something, you're like, screw it. Like, I've had a long day, or if someone texts you, you're like, might as well have a conversation while I'm working, and you sort of give into it. And the habits sort of, give away within a few days or whatever, because you can't keep on top of it. So if you're going to build habits, the easiest way is forget all this willpower stuff that I'm going to change, I'm going to do all this. Just make it very, very easy for yourself. So one of the ones is, if you don't want to have junk food anymore, it is far easier not to buy it in the first place than to have it in your house and then say, I'm not going to eat it. Because if it's in your house, you're eating it. Like, you're just going to eat it. Whereas when you're in Tesco, to make the decision, shall I buy it, shall I not buy it, is not that hard. Just kind of just don't buy it. But once it's your house, forget about it. You don't even have the choice anymore. You're going to eat it at some point. You're going to be tired and you're going to eat it. So I think the same thing applies overall. If you're building habits for your work, then I think just set up your life in a way which is going to force you to do it, which doesn't give you a choice. I spend a lot of time on my phone in bed. I do that all the time. Like, I have to watch like an hour of YouTube or something before I go to sleep or something, right? But if you just put your phone away somewhere, like in a different room or something, then you don't have to, and then you can't. So I think with habits, coming back to property, is the one main thing is the one thing by Gary Keller. I would religiously follow that, and then I would build habits which get you to take small amounts of action every single day, and really forcing yourself to stick to those things. Otherwise, what happens in 2 days later, you sort of forget about all these tiny habits which you do need, and you sort of just stick to that course.
I think there's some great recommendations actually, and some great tips for people, especially the habits of setting yourself up to win at the end of the day. Going back to the junk food, the best way to set yourself up to win in the moment is to not buy it in the first place. If it's out of the house, once it gets into the house, you set yourself up to fail. Same with the phone. I do the same thing actually. I make sure, just one thing I do is, with my alarm clock on my phone, I put my phone the other side of my bedroom, and put the alarm on really loud. So I have to get up. And it's the most annoying noise that I choose, as well, just to.
And that's exactly what I mean. So the reason I mentioned that was because, for example, now let's say you picked that you're going to do one thing a day, or you've got the strategy, which is the one thing, and then you say, okay, well, I'm going to wake up at 7 a.m. every single day to start doing my work. Then I know if the phone is next to me and the thing goes off, I might be like, oh, well, maybe. Or the strategy you're saying, which is you put the phone on the other side of the room, you have no choice. And what it actually does is, because you have no choice, there's no willpower required. You have no choice. Like you have to get up. And so if you keep doing that throughout your day and you just set yourself up, then it's much harder to fail. Whereas if you have your phone next to you, then you're kind of like 20 minutes and I'll get up. And then you go downstairs and you have some junk food and you're like, okay, well, I'll have a bit today. And the list goes on and on. So if you're going to start out in property, and you're starting a new business, then there are certain habits you will sort of have to put in place. Like, you need to work a lot when you're starting out compared to maybe later on, and so on and so on. And so if you just make it easy for yourself, it's far better than trying to force yourself from a willpower point of view.
Yeah, it's knowing yourself, isn't it? Like, going back to the phone thing, I know that I would hit snooze, so I'll put it across the room. And it's being honest with yourself as to what your pitfalls are, so to speak. Someone else might not have a problem getting up. That's not their problem, but junk food might be their issue. So how do you set yourself up in advance and get into those habits? That's very interesting. Those recommendations and that book as well, The One Thing. And who's the author again, just for people listening?
The author is Gary Keller. I'm pretty sure that is the author, Gary Keller. And yeah, like I said, it's something everyone should religiously follow, especially at the start. Because if you have a full-time job right now, and you're trying to get into property full-time, so you're trying to do this transition of, I'm working on a job right now, I want to move into property, then you have even less time. You're working 9 to 5, then you have a bit of time after. How can you then spend your focus on 3 things when you have such limited time? You already got to narrow it down to 1.
Perfect. Ahmed, I'm going to end us there if we can. For people who want to find you, learn more about you, where can they get hold of you?
So they can get to my website, which is my full name, ahmedkhan.co. That's co. So it's not .com.co.uk. It's literally just ahmedkhan.co. And I actually have a free service accommodation course, which is like an 8-hour-long service accommodation course, which anyone can access for free. So if you go onto my website and send me a message, I can send it across to you. And that that goes through literally A to Z of service accommodation, if that's what some people want to do. And I do some developments and those sort of things. So if people want more information, they can get in touch, and I can send that across.
Perfect. No, Ahmed, thank you very much for your time. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Thanks again for joining me.